Hey guys, so in this video, I'm going to show you how we can build a simple web scraper using n8n. We're not going to be using any APIs or any Python libraries, right? We're just going to be using a more direct scraping method or a crawler style scraping method, right, from the website itself. So we'll be getting the website, getting all the pages in the website, getting its content, and then we'll put it into a Google Sheet, such as something like this, right? The URL, sitemaps, and also these details and contents of the website, right? All of the content on the website. You can ignore this name because I'm using this Google Sheet for testing as well, other tests. So yeah, after you get all this content, you're able to use it for market research, market analysis, or even lead generation for your own use case. So why should we learn how to build a web scraper on n8n, right? Why not just use an existing tool out there, right? I would say it's very important for you to actually learn how it actually works, right? You build up the foundation to understand what a web scraper actually does instead of just blindly using an AI powered web scraper online, right? Instead, try to build one yourself and understand how it actually works. So you can apply this knowledge not only in web scraping, you can apply it for other things as well. So firstly, I would say the most important thing to understand is a website structure, right? A website structure, how it actually works, right? So firstly, let's just hit on to this close gelato. I'm just going to use this as an example because this was a gelato place that I just went over the weekend, so I started searching about it, right? So in a website, right, you would have many pages. It's made up of many pages: about us, the shop page, contact, right? Even in the shop page, there are the products, right? Different products inside the shop page itself, which it's not very obvious for even users to manually click around all these pages, right? Instead, what would be better is if we have the website give us a map of its own content, right? So in this case, which is robots.txt, which comes to our first point, robots.txt. So robots.txt is a file that basically you can just include it in the URL, right? Just put /robots.txt like so. So basically, it's a file that just tells it's just basically like a signboard which tells search engines like Google or web scrapers on what pages can be crawled or what's not allowed, what's allowed, what's not allowed. In this case, all of these are not allowed. And what's the most important thing that we need here is this sitemap, right? So what's the most important thing that we need from this robots.txt file is this sitemap. So let's just search it up, right? So a sitemap is essentially just a directory or an official list of pages that the business wants to be indexed by the search engine, for example, Google, right? So I'm not really an SEO expert, but if you let the search engine index your websites or your pages, it'll mean it'll be searchable from Google search itself, right? So in this case, it just has more XML files, right? Which is a list to more files. In this case, I think it's the actual URL of the site, right? You just copy this, right? You get the actual URL of the site, right? In this case. So you just copy paste this into the search bar, you will get the actual site itself, right? Sorry. You get the actual site itself, right? The products page. In this case, it was the shop and product page, right? The product page. So there are always a robots.txt page where we can then get the sitemaps. And in this case, we went to the sitemaps index, right? Right here. This is the sitemaps where we then got into the actual URLs after getting into the sitemap index file, right? So in a sitemap, right, every LOC, right, location is an actual file that you can search on the browser, right? So just back to our workflow, right? So firstly, we'll always have a chatbot to input the URL that we want. It can be a trigger form if you want, but in this case, I'm using a chatbot. I mean a chat, right? In this case, I'm using a chat trigger instead of a trigger form, right? So it's just easier for me to test. So firstly, we'll then check whether or not robots.txt exists. And how we check this is by using a HTTP request, right? Basically just putting the chat input, right, which is this URL, and then /robots.txt, which brings us to this page earlier, right? This page earlier. So in this case, I tried with our website, and we went to this page, right? And in this case, there's no sitemaps. There's no sitemaps, right? We did not allow robot.txt. So in this case, it did not exist. So sitemap does not exist in the data, right? Does not exist in this whole page data. So we then go on to the bottom path, right? If it does, it'll just go to the sitemap itself and extract the HTML data from the sitemap, which is all of this. Right? If it does exist, it'll extract all of this out. If sitemap doesn't exist, it'll manually add the sitemap to the URL. And in this case, it's see, we are getting the input from the chat message, right, earlier, this chat message, and then we're just attaching sitemap.xml to the end of this URL, right? So we'll just manually add sitemap.xml to the URL of the website, right? So in this case, we just copy this, and you can see the actual site of how it looks like, right? This XML file looks like. So we have the actual directory of the actual websites of the Sigma School website, right? Student reviews, student stories, etc. So after that, we'll then just merge of this data together, and we just pass it to a AI agent. Right, so this AI agent then just tells us whether or not if it's a URL or if it's a XML, right? So as I previously showed, right, you can see whether or not if it's a URL based on how it ends, right? .xml or .co. In this case, this was a .xml for the closed gelado, right? So if it's an XML, we want to just standardize that to have a key value pair that tells us pathway is a URL or pathway is a XML, right? Because it will then proceed to different paths, XML or URL. So if it's an URL, you just go up here, and if it's an XML, we need to get the XML file, which is this file first. We need to go to the next index XML file, right? Index segment file, before we can get to the actual URL itself. So in this case, it's they're going up here, which is the top path. So the next step is to standardize the keys, right? So the keys, right, we are going to be changing it from LC, location, to URL, just to standardize things, right? So in this case, we'll get these 3 URLs. We'll then pass it through a HTTP request. So this is just the way the browser, or our scraper, how it talks to the websites, right? So when you have a URL, something like this, right, you have your URL, and you just hit enter in the browser, you go into the browser, right? But when you're using a HTTP request, and when you hit this, you run this step, you just get the whole HTML data from the website, which is essentially, after that, we'll just convert it into Markdown, right? Because when we get a web page, right, it's a very messy HTML format, which it's hard to read, right? So we just want to make it into Markdown so that it's easier for us to read, right? Or for our codes to read, where we just want the actual content of the website instead of the HTML formatting, etc. Which is then ready for analysis. Basically, right after this step, right, everything after Markdown, you can then tweak it based on your own use case, right? But in my case, I'm just going to clean the data. I'm going to get the emails, right, phone number, and the social media from the website, right? Phone number and the socials, right? You can use it to, let's say, check for their products that they have, right? Up to you. Right? But in this case, I'm going to show you guys how you guys can do all of this, right? So firstly, I would then batch the items up into different batches. So instead of putting all of these URLs into one and then passing it through all of this, I ensured that there is a loop just so that it runs it in batches, right? So let's say if there's 5, I want to let it run. I mean, if there's 10 things here, right? I want it to run 4 things at one go, right? Four pages at one go. If there's 10 pages, I want it to run at 4 pages at one go, instead of 10 at the whole 10 pages at one go, because it would cause memory errors memory related errors inside n8n. And one of the ways to prevent this is by adding loops, right? Having more loops to split up the workflow, the workload, right? Yeah. So from this, we can I'm just gonna further clean the data, right? By removing more of this markdown formatting, right? That earlier, so that's more readable by the code later on. So we then extract the emails from these pages, extract the phone number, extract the socials, and then add it into Google Sheets. However, I have another note to chunk it up, right? Because the max amount of characters that can be in a cell is 50,000 words. And when you scrape pages, you can easily go over 50,000 pages, right? 50,000 characters, right? So in this case, every 48,000 words, I'm just going to create it as a different item. That's why there's 2 items. Then only we put it into Google Sheets, right? Yep. So in any case, I'm just gonna try to run maybe something different. So I'm just gonna try and run this Sharks Muay Thai, which is a place I used to go for training Muay Thai and MMA, right? So just put this as a URL, put this in the URL, and let it run. Right. So in this case, there was a robots.txt, and the sitemap does exist. That's why it passes into this AI agent, which then gets the sitemap, right? So as you can see, when you go into the robots.txt of this Sharks Muay Thai, you get to see the sitemap. And if sitemap exists, you then go up. You then go the top path. In this case, it's the top path. Right. Then you just continue running. Just continue running. Oh, so for the bottom path, yeah, I'll explain this part in a bit. Just keep looping. Okay, so now that's run already. Right. You can see that all of the data, all the content will then be filled up here. The reason why we do have so many filled is because, like I mentioned just now, it has to split it into chunks before we can add it into Google Sheets, right? This is just a very preliminary basic scraper, so that's why things are always packed. So you can just easily delete this and show everything at one go, right? Show it's all from the same URL, but yeah, you can come up with a script for that to change it. But in this case, this is a bare bones web scraper, that's why I just kept it as minimal as possible, right? So firstly, if it goes to the bottom path, which would mean that it is a XML, right? Means that here is an XML. The page after you open this sitemap, right? This file leads to even more XMLs, right? Sorry. It should mean that when you do open this file, it leads you to more XML files, right? So if it does lead you to more files, it will then bring you to the bottom path, which is this path right now. Then you only need to open it again before you can see the actual websites, right? Actual sites. So yeah. Firstly, similar like before, we need to standardize the location, right? Change it to URL just to make it standardized, right? See, you get to more XMLs, right? And if you do copy paste this, it will only then bring you to the websites, right? It bring you to the actual websites. Now if you just search this, it's the actual website. Yeah, fundamentals. Wow. Okay. So then, after we get the actual XMLs, we'll then use a HTTP request to actually go to the XML to the actual page, right? To get to this page where we can get all of this. Where we can get all of this, right? Through there, I'm just going to drag the XML and change it into JSON so that I can drag and drop this for my HTTP request later on, which is where I can get the actual URL. And from here, I'm just going to find the actual URL. So what this code node basically does is that it finds all of these links, right? All of these actual URLs, and just pulls it out, right? Without all of this other image content or this last modified content, which we do not need. So after this, it will be the same flow as the above, where we then get the actual HTML data from each of these links, right? Each of these 15 links. We then batch the items up and throws it into a loop. Yeah. Yep, so this is just a basic web scraper that I've built. I'll be including a link to in the description to where you can download this web scraper for you to use and just experiment and just in general learn how a web scraper actually works. And yeah, do play around with it, and you will need to set up this connection to Google Sheets, right? You need to create a credential here, create new credential, and just log into Google, right? Sign in to Google, and yeah, do play around with this web scraper. Let me know what you think about it. Try it with your own websites, your own business, your own competitors, and see whether or not it does work for your use case. And yeah, I think that's all from me. Yeah, thank you for watching, and happy automating. Thank you.